Okay, so the first step of whatever model you want to make, it's to gather references. So what I do is when I get a commission, most of the time they're not going to give you like proper references. They will tell you something, and if you don't like give them the references that you collected, it's gonna like get into a lot of complex stuff where they're like, I don't like this and I don't like that. So you have to come to like terms with what you want to make. So you gather your references, and then I'll so this is like the best map, like app that I use for like references. So you just put them up here, you can scale them, you can zoom in, so you can have like a lot of stuff. So I was basically like making a character mesh, like not character but like armor mesh, right? And yeah, that's gonna be like the next video, and I'll teach you guys how to do that. And so to make a character mob, like for your game or like, like a minion or whatever, you have to gather references. So I didn't want like a strong looking goblin, like this is a commission, obviously. And I instead wanted like, not me personally, but like the guy wanted something that looked weak, kind of. And this guy is like way too muscular. But you can take some ideas of him, like the ears and like the armor and all that stuff, like the weapon, the shield, and the grips and whatnot. You can do that, and that's what we're gonna do today. So I go back to the uh, Blender view, and if you look at this, we can see that like I did add like a few like codes and stuff. So this is like the next step, which is basically creating a block up. So you first, I would suggest you learn Blender a little bit, and then a block out is something like you create to resemble or like a base. It serves as a base for the character that you're trying to make. Think like make a head, and then like press Control 2 if you want to like apply a quick subdivision modifier, and then like shape it, move it, and then sculpt it a little bit. Like you go here, and you just drag it. Oh yeah, also always have this on for the sculpture like take effect on like both sides. It depends on the axis that you have here. Okay, so let's get on with the next step, which is creating a blockout. So you basically create a blockout like this, and like you create like a low poly kind of like version of it basically, and then you can get to the sculpting part. So first you create like all the stuff you need, like the accessories and all that, and then I would suggest personally to have the accessories separately, because it helps a ton when you want to like retopologize like the model. So retopology is another step we'll get into. So you should create a base mesh and then model it to however you want it to be, and then what you need to do is like create the accessories, and you see how like they're all separate. That's better for me. So let's get on with the next step. So the next step is sculpting, which is like I would say like the end goal. Like you want to get good at sculpting no matter what, but you could be a good poly modeler, and you can still make armor. And I'll show you in a bit, like the stuff that I made with just poly modeling. Okay, so it's just to show you guys, but this is like a model that I basically like poly model. So poly modeling is where you like go into like like your edit mode and stuff, and then you just move it like each piece by piece, right? And me personally, I feel like like sculpting is gonna be your end goal anyways, like no matter what. Because you have to get good at sculpting if you wanna like, start modeling. You can poly model, but like, especially when it comes to like characters and stuff, you need the sculpting. It's gonna be really hard otherwise. For Roblox specifically, I guess you could like polymodel a lot because like some really good like models that I know, people who make UGC stuff, they still polymodel and stuff. Like, you could still do that, like once you're good enough, you'll know what you're good at, what technique you want to do, and that's the next part. So you could like polymodel or polymodeling. So that's what you want to do. So the fourth step is retopology. So before we get into that step, I'll do like a quick like time lapse of this part where like I sculpt in some details on the character. All right. So once you feel like like your model is ready to, like it looks fine, and you sculpted in your details and whatever you wanted, and you feel like you want to feel like you're done with your model. You can like look around and see like if there are like any artifacts that you want. Also, I would suggest turning off symmetry sometimes. Symmetry, I mean like turning it off sometimes, and adding some, like unique features, I guess you could say. And basically like for example over here. Yeah, okay. Okay. So feel like he's ready to be veto code. And for this, I would totally, be against you going to a website called vfxmed.com and, getting some plugins, but, that's totally something you shouldn't do. And, that's very immoral. You shouldn't do that. So for reach apology, I use something called I'll show you. Hold on. Okay, I can't click reach for right now because I have to like save the file. So okay, so once you have like your model and you feel like you're done with it, you do all transfers and uh your geometry to mesh. So this is like your high poly. So let's get back. So the reason you do reach apology is because let me show you. Give me a second. So you can't get this model inside the game without like reach apologizing the model because that means your game is basically gonna explode. And Roblox has like a count limit of under 10K for like models, unless your things are like separate. We'll get onto that later. And like if you export it, you could export it as a model. And yeah, okay. So reach topology. So reach topology is basically where you create a like a low poly version of the model, and you do it this way. So you go here, and then you go here, and then you click reach topology, and then you know, and then start off like this. So you could do it the manual way, like everyone does on Blender, like most people do it this way, or you could get a add-on called Retopology Flow, and this is like the best add-on you could get, and for for this. Okay, so this is like a poly strip. What's up? Okay, I don't know what's the problem with it, but hold on. I think very, let's just create a polygon. Okay, so oh, okay, okay, my bad. Okay, so once you're done with like that, okay, so it's important that you have like a proper like topology, especially when it comes to this, because this is how like your uh animations are gonna work. So you don't want to like uh retopology is done, we end up with like 6,000 triangles, I guess. You know, so what I did for this was basically I just copy pasted them from my low poly version, like the blockout I made. Since they kind of retain their shape, I thought there was like no need to just retopolling that. And so what you have to do is you have to take this and then you have to export this as the high poly and then limit to the collection. And once you're done with it, you can just, close this. And then you open up Substance Painter. And, reach topology takes some time, I guess. It's hard to do it by hand. There's some softwares that you can use to do like an automatic reach topology, but when characters move, it's important that the geometry is kind of proper. Otherwise, it's just gonna mess it up for you. Oh yeah, my bad, my bad. You have to UE and drag the character.